I was 25. There I was, sitting before a plain cake, when my husband handed me an envelope. "A retreat, just for you. It'll do you good," he said. The way he said it sounded more like a dismissal than a kindness. Still, I smiled. I pretended it was an act of care. Perhaps deep down, I already knew it was a farewell. The place seemed perfect. The silence, the scent of the woods, the sound of leaves stirred by the wind. But an emptiness trailed me, as if this gift carried a shadow. I remember his expression that night, a weary smile, a distant gaze. Asterisk. You need to breathe. Away from me. I was sure I heard those unspoken words hanging in the air. The thought throbbed in my head for the entire journey. When I arrived at the center, the welcome was cordial. But what truly marked me was the feeling of being pushed to the very edge of my own life. This wasn't just a pause, it was a message. And ironically, it was in this space of imposed silence that I found a noise rising from within, a restlessness that grew with every footstep on the wooden floors, as if this gift wasn't meant to push me away from the world, but to pull me towards something else entirely. Esteras, did he already know? The thought surfaced, and I swallowed it down. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the first practice room, never imagining how that simple gesture would change everything. The room was simple, yet every detail seemed designed to strip me bare from the inside out. Pale wood, neat rows of tatami mats, the air thick with lavender and cedarwood oil. I closed my eyes, breathing deep, trying to silence the whirlwind of thoughts about my husband. When I opened them, he was there, the instructor. He was young, calm, his posture solid. I didn't need words to feel the difference. His gaze held mine for a fraction of a second too long. His body filled the space without effort, yet in a way that made me subtly shift my own. When he said we would be working on our hips and lower back, I just nodded. My voice would have failed me if I had tried to speak. He first approached during the opening posture. His touch was nothing but technique. And yet, it was impossible to ignore the heat that arced through the air between us. I felt his presence before his hand ever made contact. His breath, steady and measured, seemed to set the rhythm for my own. "Focus here," he said, gesturing to my waist. I did as he asked, but inside me, everything was a chaotic hum. With every instruction, his voice felt like a caress against my skin. This retreat was meant to bring me peace. Instead, it confronted me with a presence that dared me to admit something I had never had the courage to face. My body reacted without my permission. And in that moment, as his fingers neared to correct my alignment, I understood. Perhaps my husband's gift hadn't been a dismissal after all. Perhaps it was a disguised surrender. In pigeon pose, I felt the cool mat beneath me, and his presence above me, solid, inescapable. His hand settled on my waist with a precision that didn't ask for permission. The way his fingers traced the curve of my lower back down to the base of my spine was more than just technique. It was a hidden whisper, stoking embers I thought had long gone cold. My body answered on its own, a sharp intake of breath, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The room was full, yet in that instant, it felt as if it had been made for just the two of us. Every adjustment was a silent invitation, and I, fragile in this so-called surrender to the moment, could no longer tell the difference between a physical stretch and a deliberate provocation. "Relax more," he whispered, the sound almost lost. "Let it happen." I tried to believe it was merely an instruction, but then why did my skin tingle in waves? Why did my legs tremble with more than just exertion? Guilt had not yet found its name, but the heat flooding my veins was already screaming it. I wondered, did he feel it too? Or did all of this live only inside me, waiting for a crack to emerge? As I rose from the pose, our eyes met. The glance was fleeting, but it was enough. The line between practice and temptation had been drawn, and we both knew crossing it was now only a matter of time. He moved closer again, asking me to adjust my front leg. The pose demanded surrender, but what filled me wasn't the sensation of a stretch. It was the anticipation of his touch. And then it came. First, It was restrained, technical, a simple adjustment of an angle. Then, as he shifted, his fingers drifted, brushing against the very edge of the fabric that covered me. For a heartbeat, the air in the room grew still. "Here," he whispered, his touch so light it was like he was tracing the outline of a boundary. My breath caught in my throat. My body, silent and still, had already answered him. A silent asterisk, yes asterisk, bloomed inside me. But the echo of the life I'd left at home, a muffled scream in my mind, insisted on asterisk, no asterisk. This battle between instinct and memory tore through me. And he knew. He could feel my hesitation. He was dancing on the knife's edge between professional gesture and unspoken intent. "If this is uncomfortable, I'll stop," he said, his voice low, but he didn't move away. I should have told him to stop. I should have. But the words dissolved on my tongue, and all that escaped was a single, shuddering breath. The kind of breath that says everything the mouth dares not speak. And in that instant, I understood. This retreat wasn't pushing me away from the world. It was shoving me head first into the abyss, where desire dwells in silence. I lay in savasana, trying to surrender to the quiet. The wooden ceiling above seemed motionless, but inside me, everything was in turmoil. Then, without warning, I sensed him approaching. The subtle sound of the mat giving way beneath his knees announced his presence beside me. His breath, warm and steady, brushed against the skin of my neck. My body awoke before my mind could. When his hand came to rest on my stomach, it was a simple gesture, nothing an outsider would see as improper. But I felt it. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if his palm was mapping a hidden geography. He paused there, over the thin layer of fabric, never crossing a physical boundary. He didn't have to. The weight of his hand alone was enough to leave every nerve ending exposed, as if he had found a hidden key, unlocking doors I had only pretended to keep shut. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his voice a low thrum, thick with a heavy calm. I nodded, even as a tremor ran through me. He wasn't asking for permission. That had already been granted in the silence between us. This wasn't a game of consent. It was about a surrender he had already recognized in me. And I knew, with a piercing clarity, that my resistance was just a performance. With every touch, every suspended pause, he was dismantling my disguise piece by piece. I closed my eyes not to escape, but to feel everything more clearly. And deep down, the question that pierced me was, how far did he intend to take me? He placed his palm, open and firm, at the base of my hip. My body responded without thought, a subtle arch, as if seeking the echo of his touch. I tried to disguise it, to convince myself it was all still part of some alignment. But the body doesn't lie, and his seemed to read my every hesitation. "Better like this," he murmured, his voice dressed in the guise of instruction, but hiding something in its folds. My breath no longer obeyed the calm rhythm he suggested. It was shallow, tense, betraying the control I was trying to maintain. The space between us had dissolved. All that remained was the constancy of his touch and my futile effort to contain what was already overflowing. The sharpest part was being fully aware. I knew that this could no longer be mistaken for technique. The intention pulsed in the silence, in every touch that lingered a moment too long. I clung to my disguise like someone trying to hold a sheet in a windstorm, because admitting the truth would be to throw open the door to the abyss. But deep down, that door was already wide open. And the question haunted me. Did he feel it too? Or was it just me, trying to dress up pure temptation in the clothes of practice? When he finally lifted his hand, the movement slow and deliberate, the emptiness he left behind screamed louder than his touch ever had. And in that moment, I understood. This was no longer about stretching. It was about me and him and everything that hadn't happened yet, but already existed in the silence. He guided me to my knees on the mat, with the firmness of one who commands not only the body, but time itself. He came up behind me, his breath brushing the skin near my ear. "Trust me," he whispered. And in that instant, My body had already yielded before my mind could even react. His hand slid beneath my top. The shock of his skin against mine was a silent bolt of lightning that shot through my entire being. They moved upward, slowly, as if memorizing a secret path, until they cupped my breasts, the thin fabric of my bra now a meaningless veil. His touch there wasn't a gesture, it was a landmark. A shiver racked my body, telling him more than any word ever could. The silence in the room felt like a witness. I tried to hold my breath, but it escaped in broken gasps, revealing what my body could no longer hide. I made no sound, but when I met his gaze in the mirror beside us, I knew my eyes were screaming everything my mouth refused to say. I had already surrendered. He felt it. His fingers pressed with a gentle decisiveness, as if sealing a silent pact. I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to dive deeper into what was already consuming me. Right and wrong became tangled, and every cell in my body knew it was already too late. And when his lips brushed against the nape of my neck, a touch as light as air, I knew there was no going back. From this point on, there was only the crossing and the forgetting of who I used to be. The friction started subtly, almost innocently, but I knew. There was no innocence left. Our bodies moved together, separated only by thin layers of clothing that felt more like a memory than a barrier. I felt the hard ridge of him against me, and my legs trembled, as if they could no longer bear the weight of what was burning inside me. I turned slowly, as if daring my own fate. We were so close, the air between us had vanished. Our faces brushed, and in that shared glance there was no doubt. I asked without speaking. He answered without needing permission. "We shouldn't," I murmured, but the words were a surrender, not a refusal. He rested his cheek against mine, feeling the heat radiating from my skin, and his hand cradled the back of my neck, anchoring me to the moment. The world shrank to the heat passing from his body to mine, the mingling of our breath, the tremor that exposed us both. Our clothes were still on, but they were artifacts from another time. The fabric was just cloth, a veil about to be torn away. What mattered was what pulsed beneath, a desire set alight that would no longer pretend to be discipline. And when his mouth hovered a breath from mine, the silence in the room exploded. There was no kiss, not yet, but I could already taste what was about to happen. The moment his hand brushed my leggings aside was nearly imperceptible, but for me, it felt as if time itself had stopped breathing. His fingers found me with a slow, deliberate calm. That first touch sent a shockwave through my entire body, stealing the air from my lungs. No words were spoken. There was only the sound of our ragged breaths, weaving a story in the quiet room. I knew I was crossing a threshold. The thought of my marriage was a distant, tolling bell, but my body had already made its choice, and he knew it. This wasn't a rush toward release. It was a slow, meticulous dismantling of every defense I had. I let my head fall back against his shoulder. I felt his warm breath on my neck, a gust of air fanning the flames within. A soft sigh escaped my lips, shy, but heavy with the one truth I couldn't voice. I wanted this to continue. His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me flush against him, a silent promise. "I'm here, asterisk." And cruelly, that only made me want to let go of what little control I had left. My body molded to his, surrendering to the rhythm he set, and the more I allowed, the more I wanted to allow. In that instant, we were no longer instructor and student, no longer a married woman and a stranger. We were a secret set alight, a shared breath, a silence filled with meaning. Right and wrong were just words, stripped of all power. I no longer belonged to myself, and perhaps it was that very surrender that both terrified and ignited me. As our eyes met, steady and intense, I understood without needing a single word. I was no longer my own. He pulled away slowly, like someone who understands that silence has its own language. There was no kiss, no drawn-out farewell, just a single, quiet whisper that felt less like a goodbye and more like a promise. Until tomorrow. I stood motionless for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath. My legs barely obeyed me when I rose. Each step back to the room was a stumble through a landscape of volatile emotions. My chest hammered, not just from what had just happened, but from the certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. I closed the bedroom door behind me and let my body slide to the floor, my back against the cool wood, a stark contrast to the heat that still lingered on my skin, as if his gestures had left invisible traces on me. I knew a line had been crossed. This wasn't just a yoga practice. It wasn't just a posture adjustment. It was a threshold. And the cruelest part was the clarity. I wasn't pushed. I surrendered. With the silence, with closed eyes, with bated breath. The room felt too small to contain the hurricane raging inside me. I lay on the bed, but the rough sheets only reminded me of the soft mat where I had dissolved just minutes before. I closed my eyes and relived every fragment. The perfect touch, the breath I held, the gaze that pierced me as if it had been carved into my very being. And yet something didn't fit. The strange certainty that this crossing was no accident, that someone, somewhere, already knew where I would stumble. The question that burned inside me wasn't why, but who. I fell asleep late, but when sleep finally came, it wasn't rest. It was a continuation. In the dream, he was there again. But now there were no barriers, no fabric between us. I saw myself surrendered, my face pressed into the pillow, trying to muffle sighs that seemed to escape on their own. He touched me like someone who knew every inch of the path. His mouth glided over my skin, slow, serene, as if rediscovering an intimate territory. And I, even dreaming, felt too alive to believe it was merely an invention. I woke with a start, my body damp, the sheet clinging to my skin, my heart racing. For a moment, I couldn't distinguish what had been real from what was merely nocturnal delirium. But a silent certainty burned within me. My body recognized that man as if he were an ancient chapter of my own history. I closed my eyes again, trying to push the image away, but it was useless. What was born there didn't stay in the practice room. Now, he existed inside me, even as I slept. The next morning began in silence, but something was waiting for me. Under the door, a folded piece of paper. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling its weight even before I read the words. Today, smaller room, final practice. Bring only yourself. My chest hammered. The paper was hotel letterhead, but what truly froze me were the letters at the bottom. A simple, almost ironic signature. A gift from EM. My husband's initials. For a second, the floor seemed to vanish. My blood ran cold. How could he know? How could he allow it? Asterisk plan. Asterisk it. I felt the betrayal, but alongside it, something even more disturbing. The memory of my body pulsing at the mere thought of him. The note trembled in my hands. I should have torn it up. I should have run. But the truth was, even wounded, even confused, my body had already chosen before my mind could. And so, I took a deep breath, held the paper against my chest, and left the room. I went anyway.